red, twisted monster. Without the protection of the turtle shell, its flesh and blood were exposed in the air. One could even see the red meridians and a thin layer of membrane covering it. It looked very disgusting. However, Lin Bai was protected by it and did not suffer any wounds. Seeing Little Black's miserable appearance, Lin Bai's eyes welled up and his heart was filled with an inexplicable feeling. Looking at the people in front of him with red eyes, he wished that he could cut them down with his sword. Lin Bai used his last bit of strength and mobilized all the spiritual power in his body to focus on the Ruoxue sword. An extremely cold spiritual power slowly spread from the sword. The others also sensed the change in Lin Bai's aura. They couldn't help but be vigilant. Be careful, this monster is going to use its ultimate move. Humph, he's just an arrow at the end of its flight. He can't escape. The corner of Lin Bai's mouth curled up, and his expression was stern. He waved the Ruoxue sword, and an enormous phantom appeared in the air. It was like a giant from ancient times, waving the sky-splitting divine sword in his hand. It was as if even the sky could be split into two by him. They did not expect Lin Bai to still be able to emit such a terrifying aura despite being so heavily injured. The few of them subconsciously retreated, all intimidated by Lin Bai's shocking sword intent. Countless Ruoxue's swords condensed in midair and circled around the giant. However, the most powerful sword was naturally the longsword in the giant's hand. Everyone was on guard and did not dare to let down their guard. All of you die. Following Lin Bai's angry shout, the soaring sword Gi rose up from the ground and swept the entire space into it. Nothing could escape. As he waved his sword, the giant in the sky also raised the long sword in its hand. As Ifa High and Mighty God was judging this group of blind people, tens of thousands of arrows shot out at the same time. Countless Ruoxue swords were also aimed at these people. They could not help but feel a chill in their hearts and subconsciously opened their protective shields. No one had expected that Lin Bai would be able to unleash such a huge amount of energy, even though he was at the end of his rope. A hint of doubt flashed in the city lord's eyes. Although he felt that something was wrong, he could not put his finger on it. A huge light exploded in the air. It was as if a blazing sun was slowly rising, making him almost blind. It was as if he could not see anything at all. Everyone seemed to have been dragged into a pure white space. In such an environment, it made them even more flustered. They had lost their basic judgment of common sense, and the few elders did not dare to act rashly. However, the strange thing was that the giant raised the giant sword in his hand, but he did not launch an attack for a long time. He was like a guardian god, glaring at everyone like a tiger watching its prey. The city lord finally sensed that something was wrong, so he quickly shouted, "Hurry up, don't let him escape." After realizing what was going on, everyone quickly launched an attack. Countless spiritual power shot out and landed on the giant's body. They originally thought that they would be struck down by the giant, but who would have thought that the giant was like the moon in the water, a reflection in the mirror. With just a light touch, its body suddenly became dim and then disappeared into the air. The white light also disappeared, and everything returned to its original state. Lin Bai's was long gone, and only then did everyone realize that they had been deceived. Oh no, we've been fooled. The 10,000 swords shot out at the same time, and the giant that was flying toward them were all fake. Lin Bai was seriously injured, so he couldn't use such a powerful move at all. These things were all empty and superficial, so they didn't have such great power. They were just used to scare people. They didn't expect to be fooled. For a moment, everyone's faces turned green and white, changing colors like a color palette. The city lord gritted his teeth and said, "Let's chase him. He's seriously injured, so he can't run far." At this moment, Lin Bai had taken advantage of the fact that everyone's attention was attracted by the giant and the thousands of swords in the air. It was just an illusion to deceive people. It was not in vain for him to mobilize all the spiritual power in his body. With the help of Little Treasure, he was able to make it look so realistic. Otherwise, how could this group of people be so easily fooled? He had put in a lot of effort, and his momentum was exaggerated. Although it was just an illusion, it was comparable to reality. Only in this way could he buy himself some time to catch his breath. Everyone thought that this was a powerful attack, and their attention and vigilance were all attracted by it. However, he took the opportunity to successfully break out of the encirclement. Lin Bai knew that a fake was ultimately a fake and would not be able to hold on for long. If they discovered that the giant would not attack, they would be able to see through it very quickly. However, there was no other way. Once the creator of the illusion left, the illusion wouldn't stay activated, and it would be very easy to discover the illusion. However, this short period of time was enough for him to escape. Little treasure, you saved my life this time. Lin Bai looked at the small shadow in front of him and shuttled through the cave like lightning. It was all thanks to Little Treasure that he was able to find a way out in such a short period of time. No one knew how big the underground construction was. Without a map, the terrain and environment would be exactly the same. There were also many winding paths that were like a maze. It was enough to make people lose their way. This also gave Lin Bai a certain amount of opportunity. However, he wasn't sure if those people had a map, so he didn't dare to relax his footsteps. The shadow of death followed him closely. He wasn't completely free of it. He didn't know how long he had walked, but the road ahead gradually became extremely narrow. Little Treasure wasn't affected, but Lin Bai had some difficulty walking, so his footsteps slowed down and he fell behind. Squeak, squeak. Seeing that Lin Bai did not follow, Little Treasure stopped its footsteps and kept calling out to his back. Seeing that Lin Bai had started to move, it continued walking forward. He could clearly feel that the air around him was becoming thinner and thinner, as if it was being squeezed by an invisible force. Lin Bai was like a stuffing caught in it, causing his footsteps to become heavier and heavier. The magnetic field here is not ordinary. It's a little strange. Soon, Lin Bai sensed that something was wrong. He did not know if it only affected humans. On the other hand, Little Treasure's speed was only fast. If it was not for the fact that he was waiting for Lin Bai, he would have already run away by now. Lin Bai tried to mobilize all the spiritual energy in his body. Very soon, an indescribable pain assaulted him. It was as if all his bones and tendons had been crushed by someone, turning into a bloody mess that was mixed together. He felt nauseous in his heart. He was clearly walking on an extremely smooth road, but Lin Bai felt as if he was deep in a swamp. It could be said that he was struggling to move forward. He lowered his head and noticed that mysterious patterns appeared on the ground, as if they were words and pictures from ancient times. The things carved were something that people could not understand. I've stared at them for a long time. He would still feel dizzy. He felt nauseous again. Lin Bai quickly moved his gaze away and forced himself to focus. The road in front of him had a double shadow. It was divided into countless paths. Lin Bai could only follow closely behind Little Treasure's shadow. He could hear Little Treasure's cry, so he didn't get lost. After traveling for another distance, the nauseating feeling gradually disappeared. It was as if Lin Bai had passed through an alternate dimension. Only then did he come back to life. What appeared in front of him was an incomparably huge magic array. Where is this? Lin Bai looked around at the surrounding scene. It was similar to what it looked like before, but there were some minor differences and discrepancies. In the north, south, east, and west corners, there were incomparably huge stone pillars. On top of them were carvings of various kinds of creatures. In any case, Lin Bai had never seen these creatures with strange shapes, so he couldn't even name them. He guessed that they shouldn't be creatures of this era. They might be ancient creatures that weren't even recorded in ancient books. In any case, he didn't remember seeing any related information. And with these pillars as the center, they formed a few important formations. They were contained within each other. If one looked from a high point, these formations were all contained in the same formation. These formations were like crisscrossing patterns on a chessboard. Logically speaking, they could easily affect each other. Moreover, just the aura from the formation alone was enough to show how extraordinary it was. Generally, the more powerful the formations were, the more chaotic the situation would be if the power within them was modeled and mixed with multiple types of energy. In fact, it was extremely unstable and easy for them to collapse. Hence, the formations with powerful lethality, regardless of whether they were used to strangle or suppress, would be solitary. However, each of these formations individually possessed powerful might. Although he did not know their uses for the time being, their might was not to be underestimated. Now, they had been cleverly combined together by someone. It seemed like a conflict, but in reality, they had been combined to augment each other. The power they unleashed was far greater than he had imagined. Lin Bai took a few more glances and discovered some clues. He could not help but say, "It's actually a formation within a formation." Even though it was a long time ago, the aura emitted by these formations was still not to be underestimated. Therefore, although Lin Bai was curious and wanted to study them, he still did not dare to act rashly. Right now, his condition was not good. If he made the slightest mistake, what awaited him would be a land of eternal damnation. However, Little Treasure darted into it like lightning, indicating for Lin Bai to come over. He said with some hesitation, "You want me to go in?" Little Treasure nodded humanely. Lin Bai hesitated for a moment, but still chose to believe in the treasure-hunting mouse's ability. Moreover, Little Treasure was his beast pet, so it would not put him in danger. Although Lin Bai didn't know where he was, based on the current situation, he should be safe for the time being. Even if those people caught up, they probably wouldn't be able to pass through the array formation. Red, green, and black lights flashed in the air. Little Red, Little Green, and other pet beasts appeared in front of him, accompanied by a thick smell of blood and deep bloodied wounds on their bodies. It could be seen that they had been injured quite badly in the battle just now. The wounds were all wrapped with waves of black gas, which were all left behind from the battle with the monster in the Black Sea. The wounds had not yet healed, and many more wounds had been added. The elders of the few major powers in the capital were not to be trifled with. Moreover, Little Green and Little Red had taken some attacks for Lin Bai to be able to escape. As a result, their bodies had been cut by knives and swords. There were also countless wounds caused by various types of elemental, spiritual power. In some of the deep wounds, one could even see dense white bones. Many of Little Green's scales had fallen off, revealing the flesh and blood underneath. There were no scales covering the wounds, and the wounds looked extremely terrifying. Even half of its dragon horn had been broken. Fresh blood was gurgling there. Little Red was not much better. All of the gorgeous feathers on its body had fallen off. It did not look like a phoenix. Instead, it looked like a bald bird. It was completely not as graceful and glamorous as it used to be. The one who had suffered the most was Little Black. In order to block that fatal blow for Lin Bai, more than half of the turtle shell had been flipped over by the powerful spiritual power. Its flesh and blood had been torn apart. It was a terrible sight. Even the remaining small part of the turtle shell was on the verge of falling off. It was in danger of falling off at any moment. Fortunately, Lin Bai had previously refined a lot of pills. At this moment, he gave these pills like candy beans to them. They were fed into their mouths and barely managed to stop the bleeding. However, the situation was still not optimistic. A large amount of spiritual power surged into the bodies of the three little ones and surrounded them layer by layer. The milky white spiritual power was like a firefly in the darkness. As if attracted by something, they covered Little Green's scales and Little Red's feathers one after another. The scales, tortoise shells, and feathers that were originally badly damaged fell off spontaneously. The situation of the few little ones looked even worse. However, the things that fell off were all damaged by the powerful spiritual power and could no longer be repaired. The already necrotic parts of the tissue would only cause damage to the body if they were kept there. As the necrotic things completely fell off, Little Green and Little Red's condition still showed signs of decline. However, they were much better than before. The black gas was gradually purified and then dissipated. When their bodies were completely clean, small scales actually grew out of Little Green's body. The newly born scales were extremely fragile and looked far less solid than the scales on the side. However, the dragon race's ability to heal and recover was extremely powerful. With the replenishment of spiritual power, the scales grew rapidly. In just a short while, they looked no different from the other scales on the side, except that they were a little lighter in color. The same was true for the phoenix. Since ancient times, the phoenix had been known as the undying bird. No matter how serious the injury was, or even if it was on the verge of death, it could still be reborn from the flames. Little Black's healing ability was needless to say. Lin Bai finally let out a sigh of relief. Little Green and Little Red were no longer in pain. Every pore on their bodies was completely released, as if they were soaking in a hot spring, although they felt a little hot due to the newly grown scales and feathers. Overall, everything was developing in a good way. By the time their condition stabilized, Lin Bai had almost recovered. However, his injuries were too serious. Even with the system's power transmission, he only had half of his strength now. However, this wasn't a place to stay for long. He decided to see if there was any other way out. Little Treasure, I'll have to trouble you to lead the way. Little Treasure squeaked, as if it was saying that it would take care of everything. Lin Bai had been worried that there would be some kind of array formation, but there were no obstructions along the way. Looking at the surrounding scenery, he felt that it was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. There's a sense of familiarity. The patterns on the wall seemed to be some kind of medicinal plant, and the carvings were also all kinds of medicinal herbs. They were vivid and lifelike, as if they were really no different from the real thing. There was also a faint medicinal fragrance floating in the air. Lin Bai fumbled his way over, and the sense of familiarity in his heart grew stronger and stronger. It overlapped with a certain memory in his mind, and he cried out involuntarily, "This is the Alchemist Association." There were few people here, and there were no human figures or other movements. Lin Bai guessed that he probably arrived at a certain location in the forbidden area behind the mountain, which was why this scene was like this. Suddenly, Little Treasure stopped in his tracks. As if it had sensed something, it called out to Lin Bai. Lin Bai's eyes focused, and he also heard the movement in front of him. It was as if someone was talking. Lin Bai walked over carefully, worried that he would bump into the disciples of the Alchemist Association. He saw a black shadow in the corner. Because of the dim light, he could roughly make out the outline of a person. That person was curled up in the corner, not moving at all. If he didn't look carefully, he would be easily overlooked. Wonder how eldest senior brother is doing. Is he in danger? Master, I really want to see eldest senior brother. Master, you said that as long as eldest senior brother appeared, we would be able to see you. But what if I lose eldest senior brother now? Only eldest senior brother is qualified to inherit Master's heritage. I will definitely not let those people get it. Master, don't worry. As long as eldest senior brother returns, I will. Lin Bai listened for a while at the side. It was intermittent, and he could not hear clearly what he was saying. However, he could hear clearly the familiar voice and the words, eldest senior brother. That person also noticed the movement behind him. He suddenly turned his head and met Lin Bai's probing gaze. For a moment, the two of them looked at each other. The atmosphere instantly became extremely quiet. The person in front of him was the Foolie that Lin Bai had met at the Alchemist Association previously. He blurted out, "Why is it you?" Foolie looked at him as if he was looking at a long-lost relative. "That's great. Eldest senior brother, I finally met you again." His appearance confirmed Lin Bai's guess. This was indeed the Alchemist Association. Lin Bai was surprised. He just couldn't understand why there was such a magic array under the City Lord's estate that directly connected to the location of the Alchemist Association's forbidden area. What was the connection between the two? Or perhaps it could be said that the City Lord and the Alchemist Association's president were related. From the time when the Alchemist Association had helped the City Lord's estate, Yin Hua and He Qingyuan seemed to know many secrets. Did they also know about the existence of this magic array, and what role did they play? Although the Alchemist Association and the City Lord's estate were two different forces, and the Alchemist Association also served the City Lord, the Alchemist Association's headquarters wasn't here. They weren't so close to each other. Even if the relationship was good, the two sides would still work together for a win-win situation. However, from the City Lord's estate's underground, one could directly reach the Alchemist Association's forbidden area. There was actually such a formation. If the Alchemist Association had any ill intentions, wouldn't it be very easy to wipe out the City Lord's estate? It would be the same for the other side too. How could one allow others to sleep soundly on the side of the bed? Lin Bai didn't believe that the previous City Lord and the Alchemist Association's president didn't understand this logic. Then what was the reason for their actions? Or could it be that both parties did not know? This was the act of a third party. Lin Bai frowned. Many thoughts flashed through his mind, so much so that Fu Li called out to him several times but did not notice it. It was only until his shoulder was suddenly patted that Lin Bai subconsciously wanted to attack. He thought that the people behind him had caught up and launched a sneak attack. Then, he quickly realized that the person beside him was Fu Li. Eldest senior brother, what are you thinking about? I called you for a long time, but you didn't respond. The spiritual energy on Lin Bai's fingertip gradually dissipated. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Nothing. Do you know where we are? Fu Li answered without hesitation. Of course I do. Isn't this near the forbidden area of the Alchemist Association? He looked around and didn't know what he was thinking about. Then, he said mysteriously, but this isn't the center. That thing's spiritual sense can't reach this place, so it's very safe. There's no danger. That thing? Lin Bai was a little confused. What are you talking about? He suspected that Fu Li was talking about the monster that he had encountered here previously. He didn't know the origin and background of that monster, but one thing Lin Bai was sure of was that it was extremely powerful. However, because it was suppressed and sealed here, its power was reduced by more than half. Back then, it had tried to bewitch Lin Bai to help it escape from the sealed place, but it had been seen through by Lin Bai. It had been so embarrassed that he had become angry and wanted to make a move. Even so, the coercion and pressure it had brought to Lin Bai was extremely powerful. In the end, if it had not been for the Ruoshui sword appearing, Lin Bai might not have been able to escape. He seemed to have thought of something. The main body of the black fog had also been sealed and suppressed by the city lord, and there was also a powerful creature suppressed in the forbidden area of the Alchemist Association. From the various methods it had used, it should not have been a holy creature. There seemed to be some inexplicable connection between the two, which gave people a bad feeling. For a moment, Lin Bai's imagination ran wild, and he kept feeling that there was a layer of dense fog in front of him, as if there were a pair of invisible hands covering the truth. Fu Li was still speaking clearly just a moment ago, but at this moment, he revealed a confused expression. What did I say just now? It was as if the person who spoke earlier was not him. The two of them were like tongue twisters. When he thought of Fu Li's sometimes delirious state, in the end, it was Lin Bai who was defeated. He said patiently, "It's the monster that was sealed here." It was unknown which part of Fu Li's mind was touched by these words. One could only see that he had a crazed expression on his face. He suddenly flared up. "The monster is here. We absolutely can't let it out. Don't worry. It's being suppressed well. It won't run out." Lin Bai tried to comfort him, but it didn't have any effect. Instead, it exacerbated Idiot Li's madness. No, no, no. Master is gone, and the magic artifact is no longer of any use. Master once said that the monster will run out sooner or later. Fu Li's gaze fell on Lin Bai, and he held onto his wrist tightly. His strength was shockingly strong, as if he was holding onto a life-saving straw. Only eldest senior brother can subdue the monster. He clearly did not have any cultivation, so where did he get such strength from? For a moment, Lin Bai was actually unable to break free. He frowned and could only say, "All right, let go first. I'll help you subdue the monster." Who would have thought that it was Fu Li's turn to hesitate? He sized up Lin Bai, nodded, and then shook his head violently. With such strength, it was as if his neck could be twisted. "No, now that eldest senior brother doesn't have a magic artifact, it's too dangerous. We have to find Master first, and find the things that Master left behind." He muttered something that nobody knew what he was talking about. Lin Bai was already familiar with the situation where he kept mumbling and consoling him. "Okay, then let's go find the things that Master left behind. Can you be rest assured now?" Fu Li suddenly howled and rushed forward as if he had gone mad. His speed was as fast as lightning, but in the blink of an eye, he had already fled far away. Clearly, Fu Li did not have any spiritual power or cultivation, but his casual performance showed that he was extraordinary. After all, this was a forbidden area, although there was no danger for the time being. With Fu Li would run around recklessly, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't trigger a restriction leading him into trouble. Lin Bai hesitated for a moment, but still chose to chase after him. Lin Bai shouted from behind. Don't run around. It's very dangerous here. No, I have to run quickly. Otherwise, I won't be able to find that thing. Fu Li's answer didn't make sense. Lin Bai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fu Li's figure was clearly close at hand, but just as Lin Bai was about to reach out, Fu Li floated forward like a gust of wind. He was so far away that it was impossible for anyone to reach him. Lin Bai's eyes darkened. He was slightly surprised. In Fu Li's situation, he must have used some kind of top-notch movement technique. Otherwise, even he wouldn't be able to catch up. Seeing that Fu Li was about to turn into a small black on the horizon and disappear in front of his eyes, Lin Bai calmed his mind and circulated all the spiritual power in his body. Only then was he able to barely keep up with Fu Li's pace. Otherwise, he would have been left behind long ago. The two of them chased after each other. Lin Bai was a little out of breath. On the other hand, Fu Li seemed to be fine. Not only did his speed not slow down, but it became faster and faster instead. It was also thanks to Lin Bai's profound spiritual power and powerful spiritual sense. If it was an ordinary person, they would have long collapsed from exhaustion. After an unknown amount of time, Fu Li finally stopped and knocked against the wall beside him. A blinding white light suddenly lit up, causing Lin Bai to be unable to open his eyes. When the white light dispersed, there was no longer any trace of Fu Li on the ground. There was only a huge magic array on the ground. Lin Bai carefully examined it. The mysterious patterns seemed to have life, growing rapidly like vines. In an instant, they expanded to the side. Even the walls were covered in them. Strands of golden threads wriggled and then sank into the formation. They carried an indescribable rhythm. It seemed as if they could breathe. Lin Bai suddenly had the illusion that this spell formation was alive. It was not just these patterns. Even the totems carried an indescribable rhythm. There were also those words. Lin Bai had never heard of them before. He had never seen them before. However, now was not the time to study them. If it was not for Fu Li, Lin Bai would definitely have observed them carefully. At this moment, the light gradually faded. Those totems and patterns seemed to have lost their nourishment and instantly withered. They were originally full of vitality and were waving around in all directions. Like a tide, they were all quickly retracted back into the magic formation. Even the words seemed to have faded. This was a sign that the magic formation was about to disappear. Although he did not know what method Fu Li had used to activate the magic formation just now, the spell formation could not last for long. If it disappeared again, Lin Bai was not sure if he could find it again. In the end, he chose to follow. As the world spun, he fell rapidly. It was as if he had fallen from the ninth heaven into an underground abyss. The feeling of weightlessness persisted. It was only a few breaths of time, but it gave him the feeling that it had been 10 days to half a month. Lin Bai finally felt the steadiness under his feet again, but he felt dizzy and nauseous. Although this teleportation array was not dangerous, the aftereffects were extremely strong. After resting for a while, he felt as if he had come back to life. However, he did not see Fu Li anywhere. He carefully observed his surroundings. He did not know if he had been teleported to a cave or somewhere else. All in all, the light was very dim, and the surrounding temperature was a little low. It was impossible to see clearly. A flame emerged from his fingertip. The orange light illuminated his face and his surroundings. Although the road was a little bumpy, it did not affect Lin Bai's progress. There was not much of a hindrance. The walls were uneven. After making sure that there was no danger in the surroundings and that there were no abnormal energy fluctuations, Lin Bai continued to move forward. There was only a straight passage that extended into the distance, and there were no forks. Therefore, Lin Bai guessed that Fu Li might be in front. However, this passage was narrow and could only accommodate one person. Lin Bai lowered his head and bent down to move forward. He bumped into the stone wall. Fu Li! He tried to shout, but there were several echoes around him. It was as if there were countless of him opening his mouth. They lingered around his ears, and the ending sound was extremely long. Moreover, it was in such an environment. Even if there was a flame light, Lin Bai was also slightly uncomfortable. That faint voice made people feel a little scared. It seemed that the geological environment here was a little strange. Lin Bai secretly kept an eye out. However, nothing strange happened around him. After he walked for a while, the road finally became spacious, and at the same time, a ray of light shot out from the front. This bit of light seemed to be the hope rising in the darkness, as if it could really bring endless light to people. Lin Bai carefully walked over, and a ray of spirit energy shot out from his fingertips. There was no fluctuation there, so there shouldn't be any restrictions or formations. Lin Bai passed through the light, but there was nothing unusual, and his body didn't feel uncomfortable. A familiar muttering came from ahead. It was Fu Li's voice. The deeper he went, the clearer Lin Bai heard. He saw Fu Li laying on the ground thanking something. He could not help but heave a sigh of relief. You really made it hard for me to find you. Fu Li's dancing seemed to have no pattern. Upon closer inspection, it seemed to be some kind of mysterious ancient ritual. As he danced, he chanted. However, his chanting was disorderly and seemed to have no basis. It was as if he was talking nonsense. However, if there were people who understood ancient language here, they would definitely realize that all of these were ancient words. Moreover, it was related to the sacrificial ceremony. A spell formation rose from the ground. Lin Bai subconsciously raised his hand to block it. When the light gradually faded, he could clearly see the scene in front of him. A few altars appeared out of thin air in the north, south, east, and west. The altar was small and looked very delicate. It started from the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Then, it gathered into a large altar. It appeared too suddenly as if it was really summoned by Fu Li. Seeing that there was no dangerous aura, Lin Bai carefully approached it. It seemed that it had not been used for a long time. The altar was covered in dust and had an antique look. There were also many words and patterns engraved on it. It looked very blurry, and Lin Bai could not recognize it. However, he saw that there were many hollowed-out parts on the altar, as if someone had dug them out. He guessed that there should have been something embedded here earlier and had been lost in the flow of time. When Fu Li stopped dancing and turned around, his face was deathly pale, as if his vitality had been greatly damaged. Lin Bai turned pale with fright and hurriedly asked, "Are you all right?" At the same time, he revealed a vigilant expression. He had originally thought that there was nothing wrong with this altar, but now it seemed that Fu Li's situation was definitely caused by this array formation and the altar. Lin Bai wanted to transfer spiritual energy to Fu Li to heal his injuries, but Fu Li shook his head. Seeing him approach, he gestured with his hands and feet. He did not say a word and stared straight at him. His gaze looked a little terrifying. He had never seen Fu Li like this before. It was as if he had changed into a different person. At this moment, Fu Li was no longer as crazy as he used to be. His expression was extremely serious as he pointed at the altars. However, he did not speak. It was as if he was restrained and restricted by something. "You can't speak anymore?" Fu Li nodded. As Lin Bai spoke, he wanted to pull Fu Li away from this altar. However, Fu Li seemed to have taken root in this piece of land. He could not even drag him away. Lin Bai did not understand why Fu Li was so stubborn. "Is the altar the cause of your current situation?" Fu Li nodded and shook his head, causing him to be even more confused. It took him a long time before he understood what Fu Li meant. "You want me to stand over there?" Fu Li's eyes lit up. That huge spell formation did not have the dazzling light from before. It looked ordinary and did not have any dangerous aura. However, Lin Bai had an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was clearly the most ordinary thing, but the pressure it gave him was incomparably huge. However, he did not feel any malice or evil aura. It was really indescribably strange. Lin Bai released a stream of spirit energy, but there was no reaction. It was like a small stone being thrown into the sea. There was not even a splash. He could not find out the real situation of this spell formation, so he did not dare to act rashly. However, Fu Li kept holding his hand, pushing and shoving him toward the array, as if he wouldn't stop until he achieved his goal. Fu Li hadn't done anything bad to him since the beginning, even though he seemed to be out of his mind. Sometimes, he even helped him. But now, he stubbornly asked him to walk toward the strange array and the altar. This was the first time he had done this. Just as Lin Bai was hesitating, Fu Li had already pushed him to move a little. Coincidentally, he stepped on the edge of the array formation, and in that instant, a huge suction force was transmitted. In the next second, the world spun, and Lin Bai's body was already on top of the array formation. It was as if there was something dragging him inside, making it impossible for him to escape. Lin Bai wanted to use all the spiritual power in his body to resist. But as soon as he circulated his spiritual power, it was all sucked over. He felt his blood become hot, as if something was boiling. The spiritual power couldn't wait to find an exit in his body, and all of it was drawn into the spell formation. Lin Bai could not control it at all, and it was impossible to stop it. He could only bear it. Soon, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead and slid down his face. What the hell is this thing? Lin Bai was very surprised, but he could not deal with it at all. He could only watch as the spiritual power in his body was sucked dry and squeezed. A sense of powerlessness came from him, and even his limbs became disobedient. Lin Bai knew that this was a sign of exhaustion. If this continues, I'm afraid that my entire body will be sucked into a human skin. Although Lin Bai did not understand why Fu Li would do this, he did not look like the person who would attack him. Could it be that he had been bewitched by something? It seemed that this was the only plan he had. Lin Bai secretly hated himself for letting down his guard. He had fallen into that thing's trap and was trapped in a prison, unable to escape at all. When Fu Li saw that he was in trouble, he didn't have any reaction. He was still muttering something. It was probably impossible to count on him. Little green, little red. Lin Bai wanted to summon his pet beasts to help him and see if he could escape. However, he called out a few times, but there was no response. The pet beasts seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep, no matter how he called out. There seemed to be an invisible and powerful force that blocked the connection between him and the pet beasts. Lin Bai guessed that it was this array and the altar that prevented him from summoning Little Green and Little Red. His spiritual power was constantly being absorbed, and his pet beasts could not be summoned. Lin Bai could be said to be isolated and helpless and could only rely on himself now. However, fortunately, he was different from ordinary people, and there was also a power transmission system in his body. Otherwise, if it were other people were being sucked like this, they would have already become dried humans by now. Even so, even if Lin Bai had a massive amount of spiritual power in his body, it would not be able to withstand such consumption. At this moment, his expression was extremely unsightly, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. If he did not quickly think of a way out, it was only a matter of time. Before his spiritual power was exhausted, Lin Bai tried to summon the Ruoshui sword, but it was useless. There was no reaction at all. Because of the pain, his entire facial features became slightly distorted, and even his veins were popping out. It was as if his meridians were being burned by something fierce, so much so that all the water in his body had evaporated. Lin Bai's face was red, and his whole body was like a cooked prawn. He even suspected that smoke would come out of his head in the next second. Lin Bai couldn't describe what he was feeling at the moment. He was drenched in sweat, as if he had been scooped out of the water. Such a high temperature could melt his entire body, but it was only aimed at him. On the other hand, Fu Li, who was standing next to him, had a calm expression as if nothing had happened. The altars had absorbed Lin Bai's spiritual power, emitting a red, orange, yellow, and green mottled light. It was so hot that his breath seemed to be mixed with flames. It gave people the feeling that he was inside a cauldron. Below him was a raging fire. It was stuffy and hot, as if it was about to turn into a thick, medicinal liquid. Cauldron. An idea flashed through Lin Bai's mind. With the mentality of giving it a try, he summoned the small broken furnace. It was strange. There was no reaction from the pet beasts or the Ruoshui sword before, as if it had been sealed. However, at this moment, with just a little spirit sense, the small broken furnace could not wait to appear in the air, as if it had been preparing for this. The floating small black furnace jumped up and down in the air, looking very lively. Lin Bai remembered that he had found it on a stall. At first glance, it looked ordinary, old and shabby. He could not be bothered to give it a name, so he simply called it the small broken furnace. However, unexpectedly, although this furnace was dark, it was exceptionally useful when used. It could even help Lin Bai refine high-level medicinal pills. Lin Bai gradually stopped looking down on it. After that, he realized that the cauldron was extremely mysterious. It was not as simple as he had imagined it to be. Unfortunately, he could not figure out its origin, so he did not pursue the matter further. GOL. Without even needing Lin Bai's instructions, the small broken furnace began to operate on its own. However, it did not come to the altar as Lin Bai had expected. Instead, it flew around in a circle, as if it was looking for something. Strange, why doesn't it seem to listen to me? Lin Bai frowned and formed a spell with his hand. Just as he was about to mobilize the black cauldron to save him, a violent tremor came from the body of the cauldron and it emitted a buzzing sound. The commotion here attracted the attention of Fu Li. He stared straight at the small cauldron as if he was looking at a family member that he had not seen for a long time. His eyes were even filled with tears of excitement. He seemed to want to reach out and touch the small cauldron. However, he was worried about something and withdrew his hand again. Unfortunately, Lin Bai's attention was all on the cauldron, and he did not notice Fu Li's expression. Hurry up and come over. Even if Lin Bai used the cauldron control technique, there was no reaction. He had clearly signed a contract with the small cauldron, but it was as if he had been forced to terminate. It didn't listen to his orders at all. The glimmer of hope that had finally risen was once again destroyed. Lin Bai frowned and said, "Could it be that the magnetic field here has affected it?" Just as he was feeling bewildered, the small broken cauldron stopped in front of an altar. Perhaps it was because it had absorbed Lin Bai's spiritual energy. The altar that originally looked ordinary and did not have any awe-inspiring aura was now surrounded by a mysterious aura, as if something had been activated. The grooves where the embedding had been dug up had a faint luster. Other than missing the things that were embedded on them, they looked no different from a complete altar. The altars were flowing with light and vibrant colors, like the twinkling stars in the sky. They looked dazzling and beautiful, but Lin Bai had no time to admire them. The small broken furnace did react to Lin Bai's summoning, and it even made things a little more chaotic. Lin Bai began to regret summoning it. He did not know if it was his misconception, but with the appearance of the small broken furnace, the altars and arrays were absorbing spiritual energy faster and faster. Lin Bai wanted to take it back, but he was already powerless. Moreover, it did not listen to his commands. The small broken furnace spun faster and faster in the air. A stream of light pierced through the cauldron and the altar, as if there was an inexplicable power that connected the two together. Lin Bai wanted to investigate the situation, but he could not even protect himself now. He did not have any extra spiritual energy. The small broken furnace stopped for a while, and then flew to the next altar. The altar, which was originally full of lights and divine light, had now become dim, as if something had absorbed its essence, energy, and spirit. Lin Bai couldn't help but suspect that this was the work of the small broken furnace. The small broken furnaces did the same thing to the next few altars. However, after absorbing so much of the altar's essence energy, there was still no change in its appearance. Then, he came to the front of the array and slowly entered inside. He looked at the scene in front of him in astonishment. Only then did he realize that there was a blank space in the center of the array. From the marks around it, it was just enough to fit the little broken furnace. Could it be that there was some connection between them? When the small broken furnace had completely fused with the formation and truly fused into it, a boundless light burst forth. It was so piercing that Lin Bai could hardly open his eyes. At the same time, he could feel the ground shaking violently as countless fragments fell from his head. And deep within the mountain, it was as if something had been awakened. All the disciples of the Alchemist Association saw an unprecedented spectacle. They saw that in the back of the mountain, on the mountain peak that was shaped like a cauldron, something was pulling out from the ground. However, it quickly sank in. It was just that the speed was too fast, and they had no time to clearly see the shadow of that thing. It seemed to be a small furnace. On Lin Bai's side, he saw a stream of light enter the furnace. The small cauldron that was shaking crazily suddenly became quiet. When the light disappeared, a huge force rose from the ground. It was as if a pair of invisible hands, pushed the small cauldron to Lin Bai, which finally landed in the center of his palm. The entire process was only a few seconds. Lin Bai was stunned and did not understand what had happened. The surroundings gradually became calm. Everything was calm as if nothing had happened. If it was not for the fact that there was not a single drop of spiritual power left in his body, and the small cauldron that seemed to have no changes but somehow became heavier, it would have been as if nothing had happened. It was as if nothing had happened. At this time, Fu ran over excitedly. Eldest senior brother, how do you feel? Did anything change? Lin Bai did not know how to recount the current situation. If he was to say that he was fine, all the spiritual energy in his body had been sucked dry. If he was to say that he was not fine, his body did not feel uncomfortable at all other than the lack of spiritual energy. Instead, he felt a little energetic. There doesn't seem to be any changes. When Fu heard that, his eyes widened and he shouted excitedly, "How can there be no changes?" He did not give up. He sized up Lin Bai from head to toe. He paced around on the spot and kept muttering, "How can there be no change? Where did the problem occur? It's impossible. I did everything according to Master's instructions. Could it be that I've remembered wrongly?" When he reached the end of his frustration, Fu actually began to pound his head hard. He kept banging his head against the wall at the side. Lin Bai hurriedly stopped him. Faced with Fu's expectant gaze, Lin Bai said against his will, "There might be some changes." He glanced at the small cauldron in his hand that had suddenly become heavier. It was strange. There was clearly nothing inside, but it had become much heavier. Could it be because of his spiritual power? Recalling the memory just now, he vaguely saw something fall into the dazzling light. However, when Lin Bai looked for it, there was nothing. Lin Bai was studying the changes in the small cauldron, but he did not know that the outside world had turned upside down. The city lord gave the order to capture Lin Bai. When Manhwa and the survivors woke up, everyone inquired and found out that they all said that it was Lin Bai's sudden attack that caused them to fail in refining the medicine. Everything was done by Lin Bai. After their retelling and speaking, Lin Bai had clearly become the mastermind behind all the evil deeds. Clearly, their memories had been tampered with. Moreover, this method was extremely superb. Outsiders could not see any clues at all. Even they themselves did not have any doubts. If Lin Bai was here, he would definitely refute. However, it was useless to refute. He would never be able to prove his innocence. Elder Yin, how are you feeling? Are there any other areas of discomfort? Yin Hua shook his head. Seeing that the city lord was actually in front of him, his heart immediately became excited. City lord, you're finally fine. Thank you for your hard work these days. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to last this long. Yin Hua felt a little guilty when he heard that. City lord, your words are too polite. This is what we should do. This is what we should do. At the same time, he noticed that not only the city lord, but several major forces in the capital had also arrived. It could be said that there were many strong people gathered. It was rare to see such a large group of people here. However, their expressions were all solemn, as if something major had happened. At this moment, someone asked, "Elder Yin, do you still remember what happened before you fainted?" Elder Yin sank into his memories. At that time, we originally wanted to refine medicine for the city lord, but in the end, he was just about to speak when he saw that in the blind spot where no one could see, a scarlet light flashed in the city lord's eyes. Yin Hua felt a splitting headache, as if he was about to explode. It hurts so much. The city lord hurriedly consoled him from the side. Elder Yin, don't be anxious. Think slowly. Don't miss anything. His words seemed to have some magic power, causing Yin Hua to slowly calm down. He looked at the black pupils in front of him, and his eyes were a little stunned. There seemed to be a deep and unfathomable vortex in there, and he had accidentally fallen into it. In an instant, he became like a marionette, losing his soul. However, these abnormalities were fleeting, and Yin Hua quickly returned to normal. He said word by word, "It's all Lin Bai. We can only blame him for disguising himself too well. Previously, we did not discover his true appearance, so we accidentally fell into his trap and almost caused an irreversible disaster. Fortunately, everyone came in time. Otherwise, If that monster really ran out of the seal, you and I would be sinners for all eternity. Yin Hua was filled with righteous indignation, and it was impossible to see anything that went against his heart. The words of the others were more or less the same. In any case, they were blaming Lin Bai. When the city lord saw this, a smile flashed across his eyes, and then he joined the crusading. Amy, seeing that everyone's mood was unprecedentedly high and all of them had the intention of attacking Lin Bai, a smile flashed across the city lord's eyes, followed by some haze and viciousness. If it weren't for Lin Bai, his plan would have succeeded by now, and the capital would have long been his world. Now, everything would have to start all over again. Moreover, his vitality had been greatly damaged, and he needed to lay low quietly and find another opportunity. He needed to recuperate for a long time before he could make a comeback. In any case, he had already been sealed for 1,000 years. It did not matter if he wasted a decade or a century years. He was just a little unwilling. Success was clearly right in front of him, but he had fallen short because of one person. Who would have thought that this cultivator called Lin Bai would have such great ability? If he did not cut him into pieces, it would be difficult to dispel the hatred in his heart. Pass down my orders. Search the entire capital for Lin Bai. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, you must find him. In addition, from now on, people are strictly prohibited from entering and leaving the city gates. If you want to leave the city, you must have my documents and token. Otherwise, no one is allowed to pass. If you see anyone suspicious or trying to force their way out, immediately report back and capture them. Although he was injured, his prestige was still there. Moreover, the city lord's estate was still there. Everyone hurriedly nodded their heads in agreement. The city lord faced the clan leaders and elders of the few great aristocratic families and bowed one after another. This time, I still have to thank everyone for helping me. Otherwise, I would have fallen into the trap of a thief. Everyone is meritorious and has saved the capital from fire and water. These words were extremely beautiful. Everyone hurriedly said, "City Lord, you are too polite. It is within our capabilities. Moreover, if the city lord is in trouble, we will definitely not stand by." That's right, that's right. We have set up an inescapable net. I believe that Lin Bai will not be able to escape even if he has wings. It is only a matter of time before we catch him. There will be no eggs left intact after the nest is overthrown. We will definitely help City Lord catch the fish that escaped the net as soon as possible. Even though they usually fought for power and benefits, most people still understood this principle in the face of great injustice. Generations of city lords had always had the responsibility to suppress the evil demons and protect the seal. There were also some aristocratic families who knew the secret. They knew that if the evil demon really broke the seal and reappeared in the world, it would be a disaster for the people. Presumably, the capital would no longer exist, and it would be harmful to them. Naturally, they had to help the city lord. However, they never thought that the core of the person in front of them had already changed. The real city lord's consciousness had been invaded by the evil demon, and it was possible that he had already disappeared into thin air. The city lord in front of them was only a clone of the monster, or rather, his spiritual power. He had even misled everyone, tampering with Yin Hua and the others' memories, making everyone think that Lin Bai was the one who had been possessed by the evil demons. A wisp of spiritual power was already so powerful. If the real body had come out, one could imagine how powerful it was. Unfortunately, everyone had been kept in the dark, and the only person who knew the truth, Lin Bai, had been hunted down by them as an evil demon. Soon, the news of Lin Bai's capture was spread out. Bai Shi and the others soon learned of this. One incident hadn't even ended yet, and another came. When they heard this news, they were even more incredulous. What? Senior Brother Lin actually became a demon? How is this possible? We have been living with Senior Brother Lin all day long. There must be some misunderstanding. I's absolutely true. I also found out by accident. It's said that after Senior Brother Lin went to the City Lord's estate, he accidentally touched some forbidden array. Then, he was corroded by the demonic chi inside and became the puppet of the demon. He did a lot of bad things in the dark, and even the city Lord and the Deputy City Lord were affected. After the City Lord woke up, he immediately exposed senior brother Lin's crimes. The reinforcements and elders from the various large families also rushed over and joined forces to deal with senior brother Lin. Seeing that the matter was exposed, senior brother Lin escaped with serious injuries and his whereabouts were unknown. In any case, the city lord has ordered the entire city to search for senior brother Lin. We can't even leave the city. We have to find senior brother Lin's whereabouts. When everyone heard this, they were shocked. Senior brother Lin fought against so many heroes, but he actually escaped. Just how powerful is he? They were the top-tier elite of the various aristocratic families. Qin Yin and the others couldn't help but roll their eyes. You're focusing on the wrong things. That's not the main point. The main point is that senior brother is being hunted down as a demon. If senior brother Lin was really possessed by a demon, with the support of demon Qi, it's no wonder that he could fight with those elders. Those who had received Lin Bai's favor were somewhat displeased when they heard this. What do you mean? How could senior brother Lin be a demon? How could a person like him be possessed by devil Qi? It's not like I said it. Since the city lord has said it, it must be true. Seeing that both sides were in a heated argument, Bai Shi said in a deep voice, "What time is it? You still have the mood to argue here. A disaster is coming, do you know that?" There was a moment of silence in the air, and a deathly silence spread. Bai 11 said coldly, "Use your brains to think. If Lin Bai was really possessed by the demon and committed a heinous crime, and now he has escaped, who do you think will be the first to suffer misfortune now that the city lord and the others haven't caught him yet?" Lin Bai was with them, and they were fellow disciples. It was hard to say whether these people would use them as fish in order to lure Lin Bai into taking the bait. The first person who thought it through couldn't help but swallow his saliva. "You're saying that the city lord will find us?" Bai Shi revealed a sarcastic smile. "Looks like you're not too stupid. Now you know to be afraid. Wasn't your argument quite lively just now?" Everyone looked at each other and felt their eyes go black. They finally understood what it meant to be in trouble. A deathly silence pervaded the crowd. At this moment, it was so quiet as if the sound of a needle dropping on the ground could be heard. It made people panic for no reason. After a long while, someone swallowed his saliva. "Then what should we do now? Even if senior brother Lin is controlled by the demonic Qi, we should be fine, right? Moreover, we have been staying here and haven't done anything. They shouldn't be able to do anything to us." The companion next to him looked at him as if he was looking at a fool. He couldn't help but complain, "Are you brainless? If the city gates are on fire, the fishes in the river outside would be afflicted too. Haven't you heard of this saying before? Moreover, it's such a big matter. Even the city lord and the vice city lord are implicated. Anyone who has anything to do with Lin Bai will probably not be able to escape." Everyone's hearts thumped. That means that we will also be most worried that those people will think that we have connections with the evil demons as well. After all, we've been together with Lin Bai day and night. When the disciple heard this, he immediately became anxious. They can't kill all of us at once. Moreover, we've been staying at the Shao family temporarily. If that's the case, could it be that the Shao family is also involved? Bai Shi's expression was ice cold. No one knew what he was thinking. No matter what, we came out together with Lin Bai and came from the same place. Just based on this, I'm afraid that those people will not let us off easily. What worried him the most was that if the city lord couldn't catch Lin Bai, the worst that could happen would be to vent his anger on them. If it was better, he would use them to lure Lin Bai out. No matter what, the situation would be very disadvantageous to them. Someone came up with a bad idea. "Then let's run now." The people around him rolled their eyes when they heard that. "Run? Where can you run to in the inescapable net? I heard that the whole city has been cordoned off. You are not allowed to go in or out. With your cultivation level, do you want to force your way out? I'm afraid that you will be caught as soon as you reach the door." Alas, it was all Lin Bai's fault. If he had been honest, none of this would have happened. If he had not wanted to be in the limelight, he would not have been summoned to the city lord's estate. If he had not gone to the city lord's estate mansion, none of this would have happened. Many people agreed with his words. In times of danger, the first thing one did was not to solve the problem. Moreover, they had been implicated innocently this time, which made them even more resentful. I just feel that Lin Bai likes to be in the limelight. Previously, he had pretended to be very powerful and thought that he was very impressive. He had offended many people just because he had some ability. Now, he has caused us to suffer together. Now, we might even lose our lives. Everyone sighed. Negativity and despair were wantonly growing. This place seemed to be a hotbed for the hatching of bad emotions. They spat out evil words and vented their dissatisfaction and anger toward Lin Bai. However, some of the people who were on good terms with Lin Bai and had received his favor felt a little uncomfortable when they heard this. They could not help but say, "Previously, when he stood up for us, why didn't you accuse him of being in the limelight? Now, when something happens, you have such a big opinion. How hypocritical." When that group of people heard this, they became even more furious. How can the nature of these two matters be the same? This time, the implications are very wide. Lin Bai has been possessed by an evil demon. When that time comes, even we won't be able to get away with it. Just what kind of bewitching potion did he give you guys to actually speak up for Lin Bai like this? Perhaps he was just pretending to be righteous previously. If he really had a righteous heart, how could he have been infected by the evil energy? As the saying goes, a righteous body is not afraid of a slanted shadow. Lin Bai is just a villain. That's why he fell for the devil's words. Exactly. I think he's a jinx. It's not enough to offend the Shao family. Now, he even offended the city lord, causing us all to be in bad luck. The more they talked, the more indignant they became. If Lin Bai was here, without the city lord and the others making a move, they would probably be anxious to capture Lin Bai and prove their innocence. They had nothing to do with this kind of evil demon. Bai Shi looked at the people around him, and his gaze darkened. Why are all of you still arguing here at this time? Don't you think things are troublesome enough? At this moment, the door was suddenly kicked open. Rumble. The deafening sound gave them a fright. The people who walked in were the Shao clan's disciples. They immediately surrounded them. The Shao clan's patriarch politely moved to the side. The others also made way for him. City Lord, they are the senior and junior brothers who came with Lin Bai. What was there to be afraid of? Who would have thought that this group of people would come looking for them so quickly? Immediately, someone cried out, "City Lord, we were all wronged. We have nothing to do with a devil like Lin Bai." The City Lord's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a sense of danger that was difficult to detect. He casually said, "Oh, I didn't expect you guys to be so well informed. Since you know about it so quickly." That person's heart skipped a beat. Only then did he realize that he had said the wrong thing. It was as if Lin Bai had communicated with him beforehand. His face was pale, and he was about to retort when the city lord's gaze landed on them. "Let me guess. Did Lin Bai tell you about his plan earlier? Did you know about it but didn't report it? Or did you want to deceive your superiors and subordinates? Or," his tone paused. The city lord's eyes revealed a bit of coldness that wrapped around him. It was as if he had been cast a spell, and he couldn't move at all. "Or are you also bewitched? So you're also Lin Bai's accomplices, and became one of these monsters?" No one had ever thought that the city lord would put such a big label on them. "City Lord, you must be joking." The city lord stared at him and said coldly, "Do I look like I'm joking?" The city lord immediately ordered, "Men, take down this group of people." The others wanted to resist, but their arms could not go against their thighs. Moreover, with their little strength, the guards of the city lord's estates and the masters of several big families and forces were all around them. Crushing them was as easy as crushing a mosquito. There was a huge difference in strength. Without even fighting, they would already know that they had suffered a crushing defeat. They might even be labeled as traitors by the city lord for colluding with the demons. It would be better to just surrender. At this moment, Bai Shi walked out. Among them, Bai Shi was the strongest and had the highest status. After all, he was the last disciple of the principal of one of the 4 great academies. The people who were originally in a mess looked at him as if they were looking at the backbone of their hearts. The city lord sized up Bai Shi. Compared to the others who were flustered, at a loss, and even scared like a fly that had no direction and could only buzz around, Bai Shi appeared to be too calm. "City Lord, can I say a few words?" His ice-cold eyes did not have any human emotions. It was as if even when Mount Tai collapsed in front of him, his expression would not change. His expression was cold, and no one could read his thoughts. The spiritual power fluctuations that came from Bai Shi's body were not very strong. Of course, this was only for the city lord. However, among his peers, he could be said to be one of the best. Moreover, according to his temperament, his future achievements would only be high. If he could grow up, he would definitely be a master of a region. The city lord's eyes were filled with interest as he said, "Go ahead. We have interacted with Lin Bai day and night. We can ensure that during that period of time, Lin Bai is normal and has not been possessed by an evil demon." Everyone's hearts could not help but hang in their throats. At this point in time, Bai Shi was actually still speaking up for Lin Bai. He was afraid that they would not be implicated as accomplices and would be captured together as the puppets of the evil demons. Just as they were scratching their ears and cheeks anxiously, Bai Shi's tone changed. But later on, Lin Bai went to the Alchemist Association, and from there he went to the City Lord's residence. We did not have any interactions during this, especially during that period of time in the City Lord's estate. Who doesn't know that the City Lord's estate is heavily guarded? Not to mention passing on information. Not even a fly can fly out. We completely lost contact with Lin Bai. We only know that when he was taken away, he said that he was refining pills for the City Lord. We have no idea what exactly he was doing inside. After hearing the rest of his words, everyone's hearts finally relaxed. They knew that Bai Shi had not lost his mind. He wanted to remove all the connections between them from this matter. After all, there were witnesses and evidence, and the whole city was searching for Lin Bai. There was no doubt that he was an evil demon. If he continued to speak up for Lin Bai, it would only make their situation worse, and they would be regarded as accomplices. When that time came, things would not be good. Although Senior Brother Bai and Senior Brother Lin usually have a good relationship, Senior Brother Bai still knows what is right and wrong. Bai Shi's words were reasonable and well-grounded. It was so watertight that no one could find anything wrong with it. The City Lord slowly said, "So you're saying that this matter has nothing to do with you?" Bai Shi definitely nodded. However, how could the City Lord let them off so easily? Since Lin Bai couldn't be found, then he could also find trouble with his senior and junior brothers. He could just treat it as collecting some interest in advance. After all, it was Lin Bai who had ruined the plan that he had meticulously planned for 100 years. The 100 years of hard work and effort had been destroyed just like that. He needed to go into hibernation again and wait for the next opportunity. However, he had already alerted the enemy this time. Presumably, the big families and forces in the capital would be even more vigilant and pay attention to the situation at the seal at all times. He didn't know how long he would have to wait before he could see the light of day again. At the thought of this, he could not help but feel this anger rise up in his heart. If Lin Bai was in front of him, he would definitely cut him into pieces to vent the hatred in his heart. Bai Shi noticed that a red light flashed in the City Lord's eyes before it quickly retuned to normal. It was as if he had just been hallucinating. As he stared closely, the City Lord seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly turned his gaze towards Bai Shi. His deep pupils were like unfathomable vortexes. If he was not careful, he would be sucked into them. He was in danger of being torn to shreds. He had only looked at them for a few seconds, but he already felt a little unwell. It was as if many negative emotions had appeared in his heart. It was so stifling that Bai Shi tried his best to suppress them and could not help but look away. The feeling of frustration and anger that he had nowhere to vent slowly dissipated. The emotions that suddenly surged up made him seem a little different from himself. Bai Shi was puzzled, but he secretly kept an eye out. This City Lord seemed a little strange. However, just a few casual glances from him could actually cause such a huge reaction. One had to know that Bai Shi had a firm personality and was also a cultivator of the Sword Dao, so he would not be easily influenced by the outside world. However, just a few glances from him made his mind unstable, which was enough to prove that something was strange. "Why are you looking at me like that?" The City Lord narrowed his eyes and examined Bai Shi. A light that made him uncomfortable appeared in his eyes once again, but that feeling was not as obvious as before. Bai Shi frowned slightly. "I've never seen the City Lord before, so I can't help but lose my composure. I hope the city lord won't take offense. The city lord smiled coldly. What you said just now was indeed quite reasonable. His tone suddenly turned extremely cold. However, these are all your one-sided words. How can I dispel the suspicions in my heart just because of your few words? After saying that, an invisible pressure pressed towards Bai Shi. If it was anyone else, it would be difficult for them to withstand it. However, although Bai Shi's expression was unsightly, he was neither servile nor humble. The city lord should have evidence when you capture someone, right? You can't attack us based on mere suspicions, right? The city lord did not respond to Bai Shi's words. Evidence? Then what evidence do you have to prove that you are innocent? If that's the case, you can stay in the heavenly prison peacefully. If you are really innocent, I will definitely not accuse you wrongly. After saying that, he did not bother to waste his breath on them and directly ordered people to bring them away. Bai Shi's clenched fists gradually loosened, not to mention the strength of the group of people brought by the city lord. Even if he was lucky enough to escape with his life, what about the group of senior and junior brothers behind him? As long as he was around, at least they wouldn't completely panic. If he escaped as well, the remaining people would be no different from fish meat on a chopping board and would only be at the mercy of others. The city lord and the others seemed to harbor malice towards them. Now, they had an excuse and reason to make things difficult for them. They would not give them any chance to live. When that time came, regardless of whether it was Lin Bai or them, they would not be able to clear their names. They would not be able to clear their names even if they jumped into the Yellow River. The city lord had always been secretly afraid that Bai Shi would suddenly make things difficult for them. However, Bai Shi and the others had given up and did not resist. However, there were quite a number of people who had been shouting that they had been wronged. He had underestimated this brat. He had never thought that he would have such a temperament and be able to endure it. The city lord snorted coldly. He had not been able to find an opportunity to attack. Originally, he had thought that if this group of people resisted, he would be able to kill a few of them to vent his anger. Now, he would let them off for now. A white light flashed. An elder who looked quite old summoned a compass and shot it Bai Shi and the others. He kept muttering to himself. The city lord's pupils contracted slightly. He saw that the compass was a little unnatural for a moment, but it quickly returned to normal. He pretended to be casual and sighed. I didn't expect the Gu family to even take out this thing. The elder nodded. After all, this is an important matter. We don't dare to be careless. This thing can detect demonic qi. The compass was very simple and looked quite old. There were mysterious patterns and ancient words carved on it. It should be from the ancient times, and there were very few similar words nowadays. It could be said that it had disappeared in the long river of history, and it was very difficult to understand its meaning. One could vaguely sense that it contained an extremely profound mystery, making it difficult to grasp. In the four directions, the azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise were carved with exquisite techniques, guarding the four directions. It could be seen that this magic artifact should have quite a history. However, at this moment, it seemed to be broken, and there was no movement at all. The old man looked at Bai Shi and the others being taken away, and said with some doubt, City Lord, we did not detect any demonic qi on them. The others could not help but answer, could it be that there is something wrong with the compass? It did not respond for a long time. The old man was obviously very angry when he heard this, and immediately said, even if there is a problem with you, there will not be a problem with it. The person who said this was immediately embarrassed and quickly retreated to the side. The old man explained, although its lethality is not very strong, it can accurately detect the location of the demonic qi. As long as someone has come into contact with demonic qi, even if it has only touched a strand of it, it can detect it. Since there was no problem with the compass, it proved that Bai Shi and the others had no contact with the demonic qi at all. Someone couldn't help but say, could it be that they really have been wronged? Ever since Lin Bai entered the city lord's manor, they had never seen him again. Just as he finished speaking, he felt a cold and gloomy gaze fall on him. He raised his head and looked up. It was actually the city lord who was staring straight at him. His gaze was devoid of any emotion, scaring him so much that he hurriedly lowered his head. With an embarrassed expression, he said, "'Twas just casually saying it. Everyone, don't take it to heart." The demon's methods are endless. Previously, the City Lord and the Vice City Lord were so careful and still fell for it. Maybe he has some special method to avoid it. That's right. Maybe they are connected, but they use special methods and methods to hide it. That's why the compass didn't react and couldn't be tested. The old man was very straightforward. If there is, then there is. If there isn't, then there isn't. No matter how powerful the method is, it can't hide the existence of demonic chi. Sooner or later, the fox's tail will be exposed. I think these people might really be innocent. So what if they are really innocent? After all, they are Lin Bai's senior and junior martial brothers. They are definitely related. Anyway, we are using them as bait. What if Lin Bai is fooled and really comes out? It will also prevent us from searching for him wantonly and causing panic among the people. But isn't Lin Bai possessed by the demon? How could he care about the lives of these senior and junior martial brothers? He clearly knows that this is a trap. It is impossible for him to jump into the pit. How can we know if we don't try? We can't catch him now anyway. It was a bit far-fetched to say that. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what to say. There were many different opinions, and they discussed for a long time, but there was no result. In the end, the City Lord stood up and said, "All right, we have to find Lin Bai as soon as possible. Otherwise, we don't know what he will do." After everyone left, no one noticed that the feng shui compass, which had not moved before, was now spinning wildly as if it had been affected by some inexplicable disturbance. The old man frowned. Such a situation had never happened before. Could it be that the group of people had really come into contact with demon chi? But logically speaking, why didn't the feng shui compass react just now? At this moment, the needle slowly stopped. If anyone was careful, they would have noticed that the position where it stopped was the position where the City Lord had stood. Unfortunately, no one noticed anything on the compass. At this moment, Lin Bai did not know that because of him, the people who had come with him had all been thrown into the prison of the City Lord's estate. He was studying the ordinary small cauldron in front of him. Logically speaking, it was impossible that there were no changes after the commotion just now. However, that was the truth. The small cauldron did not have any reaction. If Lin Bai had not held it in his hand, he would not even have noticed that it had become heavier. That huge formation just now almost sucked all the spiritual energy in my body dry. What exactly was that thing? Lin Bai muttered to himself. He frowned and fell into deep thought. The danger to his life just now was not a joke. Under such a dangerous situation, he had a premonition that if he had not summoned the black cauldron later, he might really have been sucked dry of spiritual energy by the mysterious array formation and the altar. Lin Bai could not resist such power at all. It carried a great pressure, and even his body could not move. Besides that, it was useless for him to summon Little Green, Little Red, and other pet beasts. Even the Ruoshui sword, which had saved him from fire and water many times, could not do it. One had to know that the Ruoshui sword was the Sword Immortal's natal sword. Its power could be imagined, but because Lin Bai was not strong enough now, most of the sword's power was sealed. As Lin Bai grew stronger, the seal would also be broken. This was to prevent him from suddenly grasping a powerful magic treasure and being unable to suppress it. There might even be a backlash. However, even if more than half of the Ruoshui sword was sealed, its strength could not be underestimated. It had played a huge role in the previous battles. If it was not for the Ruoshui sword, Lin Bai would have died a long time ago. Why would there be a reaction when the Black Cauldron is summoned? Lin Bai was puzzled. Could it be that this cauldron has some connection with this array altar? However, from the spiritual energy fluctuations between the two, there was no connection at all. There was not even any similarity. It was as if there was a mysterious and unfathomable force that connected them together. Perhaps everything that happened just now was just an accident. However, Lin Bai did not believe that there would be such a coincidence in this world. The only explanation was that he had missed something. What on earth is it? Lin Bai looked at the small cauldron floating in the air. At this moment, it appeared to be extremely obedient. It did not dare to head east or west. However, just before, the small cauldron was not under his command. It seemed to have lost control. However, It just so happened that it accidentally entered the inner part of the altar and absorbed the spiritual energy inside the altar, including the spiritual energy that the array formation and the altar absorbed from Lin Bai's body. It all went into the small black cauldron. Instead, it solved Lin Bai's predicament. Lin Bai thought for a long time, but did not have any leads. However, there was one thing that he was sure of. The small black cauldron was definitely related to the thing in front of him. It was said that experiments were the only way to test one's true knowledge. Lin Bai decided to test it out. Red, green, and black lights flashed in the sky. Little red, little green, and little black appeared beside Lin Bai. Ding! The host has passed on 30 days of cultivation to little green. 500 times return has been successfully triggered. The host has received 15,000 days of cultivation. Ding! The host has passed on 10 days of cultivation to little red. 800-fold return has been successfully triggered. The host has obtained 8,000 days of cultivation. Following the sound of the system notification, little green and little red had almost fully recovered from their injuries. Even a portion of Lin Bai's spiritual energy, which had been sucked away earlier, had also recovered due to the return of the system's cultivation. His complexion was visibly improving. Although it was still a little pale, it was much better than his previous state of exhaustion. He believed that he would be able to fully recover in just a few more times with the addition of the power transmission. Little Red, try using fire. Little Red was the first that came to Lin Bai's mind. After all, refining a cauldron required fire. It could be said that it was indispensable. The two complemented and countered each other, yet they complemented each other. Little Red nodded her head in a human-like manner. The feathers on her body became even more vivid. Flames shot out and landed on the small cauldron. The huge flame fell like a fireball, making the small cauldron even smaller. In an instant, it was swallowed by the tongue of fire. It made people wonder if it would be burned to ashes in the next second. Lin Bai's line of sight could no longer see the small cauldron. The high temperature in the surroundings caused the air to become distorted and countless gases to evaporate. If Lin Bai and Little Red had not signed a life contract and could share the flame without being affected, they would have already disappeared into thin air. Even so, his mouth and tongue were a little dry. However, it was under such high temperature that the flame flowed into a vast ocean. One could vaguely see something black floating in it, as if it was an item from another world, full of mystery. The small cauldron didn't even turn red, much less melt. Its color became even darker, as if it was 1,000-year-old black iron. It was as if the flames were nothing more than a tickle to it, and there was still no change. Lin Bai frowned and said, "Little Red, increase the flames a little more." Boom! A loud sound could be heard as the flames wrapped around the sphere and smashed down from the sky. Little Red spread its wings and flapped its wings, surrounding the small cauldron. The feathers around its body became even more brilliant. In particular, the tail feather in the middle was flowing with light and colors. It was as if sparks were falling from it, and in the next second, it would turn into a flame and burn. With such a high temperature, even Lin Bai's face was flushed red. He felt a little uncomfortable, and if it weren't for the array formation and the altar, everything else would have melted into the flame. However, what was strange was that as the flames intensified, the cauldron did not undergo any change at all. Even Little Red was a little tired. It continuously spat out the purest flames, resulting in its own spiritual power decreasing. This caused the flames later on to not be as hot as before. Even its originally flowing and colorful feathers appeared much dimmer. It spat out a ring of smoke. The small flames fluttered and fell into the cauldron. They were swaying on the verge of collapse before slowly dissipating. Looking at the situation, Lin Bai estimated that even if he squeezed Little Red dry, the cauldron would not change at all. Could it be that I was wrong and fire attacks are not enough? He fell into deep thought. Then, he waved at Little Red, indicating for it to rest for a moment. Since fire attacks are not enough, then let's test water. Roar! With a dragon roar, Little Green's body instantly became more than 1,000 feet tall. Its body circled around the small cauldron. Its dragon eyes were bright and spirited, as if it was embedded with the most precious pearl of the Eastern Sea. It was filled with the purest water element. Under the contrast of such a huge body, the small cauldron was really too small. It was like a drop in the ocean, not worth mentioning at all. In addition, its gray body was dusty. There was nothing worth paying attention to. However, it was this kind of cauldron that Little Red had used all of its strength on. No matter how many flames it spat out, it could not do anything to it. Now that Little Green let out a dragon roar, it was unknown if it could change the situation just now. Countless water pillars descended from the sky. It was as if there was a huge hole in the sky. The water from the heavenly river rolled over. In an instant, the earth shook and the mountains shook. The water smashed towards the cauldron, which was swallowed by the torrential flood within a few breaths. Originally, it would have been washed away by the huge current. However, unexpectedly, it seemed to have taken root on this piece of land and remained unmoving. Huge waves that were half the height of a person rolled up in the surroundings. The sound of the waves was incessant, and each wave was higher than the previous one. They slammed fiercely onto the small cauldron. A muffled sound could be heard. Originally, he thought that the small cauldron would be swallowed very quickly. However, in the next second, it appeared in front of his eyes in perfect condition. It was as if no matter how terrible the surrounding environment was, it would not be impacted. It was like the embodiment of the will of this solid land. As long as this world existed, it would never be destroyed. The most surprising thing was that if it could not be submerged, the cauldron should already be filled with water. It should overflow very soon. Lin Bai waited for a moment, but there was no reaction. Strange. He walked forward. The water of the 9 heavens surged endlessly. He had thought that it would not even take half a breath to fill it up, but when he focused his mind, he saw that the small cauldron was like a bottomless pit. It also seemed to be connected to some alternate dimension. There was only a shallow layer. It was as if the space around it had become a world of its own, completely isolated from other places and was unaffected. The shimmering waves could even clearly reflect Lin Bai's appearance. It was truly amazing. Lin Bai changed his train of thought. Since water was not effective, he would try another form. Ice. The temperature in the surroundings suddenly became extremely low. The originally surging river water instantly condensed into a thin layer of crystal and spread out rapidly with Little Green at the center. Unknowingly, a layer of faint white fog appeared in the surroundings. Little Green's body shuttled through it. The head and tail of the dragon could not be seen. One could vaguely see a pair of dragon eyes, which appeared even more powerful and mysterious. It soared through the clouds and rode the fog, as though it was really the most respected race in ancient times, the dragon race. It lightly exhaled, and the temperature in the air became even lower. The condensed frost wrapped around the small cauldron. The originally black cauldron looked like it was wrapped in a light blue cocoon from afar. It became thicker and thicker, but unfortunately, there was no reaction still. No matter how much Little Green tried, there was no reaction. Lin Bai had no choice but to ask it to stand down and let Little Black take the stage. Rumble. A series of earth-shaking sounds could be heard as black mountain rocks rose from the ground. It was as if some ancient existence had been awakened. Traces of time and history were all over the surface, and countless patterns crisscrossed, scattered all over the place. It was as if the stars in the sky were scattered among them. Each pattern had an indescribable rhythm that made people want to explore and pursue it. From here, it seemed to be a miniature of the mountains and earth. However, upon closer inspection, there were slight differences and discrepancies. This was simply a turtle shell, and yet it was so huge that it could even stand shoulder to shoulder with the mountains and earth. How astonishing would its original body be? As expected, what appeared in front of him was just the tip of the iceberg. This black turtle was no lesser than the Azure Dragon just now. It was none other than Little Black. Who would have thought that it was just an unremarkable little turtle in the Crystal Lake before? It was even bullied to the point of being covered in injuries because its home was destroyed. In the end, it was discovered by Lin Bai, and he had no difficulty in taking it in as a pet beast. Now that it had transformed and activated the divine beast black tortoise bloodline in its body, it had grown into a huge creature. People could not help but sigh at the impermanence of the world. One should never underestimate the potential of anything, because one would never know how high it would grow in the future. Little Black did not hesitate either. It directly pressed down with its huge body. This press seemed to change the color of heaven and earth. Even the thick and solid earth could not bear its weight. One had to know that the black turtle was 300 meters tall. Its weight could no longer be measured by numbers. The defense on its body was even harder to break. Not to mention mid-grade magic treasures, even high-grade magic treasures would find it hard to withstand it. Moreover, it did not hold back any of its strength in this strike. This was also Lin Bai's order. Those magic treasures would probably be turned into dust in an instant. Seeing this scene, Lin Bai subconsciously held his breath. However, in the next second, Little Black suddenly lifted its leg at lightning speed, as if it had been hit by something. The small black cauldron was still standing in its original position, intact. For a moment, Lin Bai became hesitant, not knowing whether to let Little Black continue. Although Little Black was known for its strong defense, this small black cauldron was like a nail to it. If Little Black were to fight it head-on, he would not be able to tell for a while whether Little Black could really step on the cauldron or whether the cauldron would poke a small hole in Little Black's foot. After hesitating for a moment, he still let Little Black back down. Lin Bai rubbed his chin and stared at the cauldron. It seems that you still have many secrets. I don't think I can solve them in a short time. Lin Bai did not plan to fight with it. Perhaps the time was not right, so even if he used all kinds of schemes and methods, he still would not be able to figure out the origins of this small cauldron. If the time was right, everything could be solved easily. After all, everything depended on an opportunity and fate. One could not force it. Otherwise, it would easily cause unnecessary losses. Thinking of this, Lin Bai felt relieved. He looked at Fu Li beside him. During his test, Fu Li had been very quiet. He did not cause trouble or run around. He just sat there quietly. Then, he stared at the small cauldron and occasionally said something he did not understand. Lin Bai had a premonition that Fu Li might know the origin of this cauldron. After all, he was the one who led him here. Then, the small cauldron appeared and absorbed all the energy of the array formation and the altar. However, with Fu Li's current state, he probably wouldn't be able to get anything out of him. Even so, Lin Bai had the mentality of asking for help. Do you know about this cauldron? Fu Li actually nodded. Lin Bai was immediately overjoyed. He thought that there was a chance and was about to speak. But who would have thought that Fu Li would point at Lin Bai's black cauldron and then point at the top of his head? Of course I know. Not only do you have the cauldron, there's also a big fellow here. Lin Bai followed the gaze he was pointing at and looked over. Other than the black wall, there was nothing else. The smile on his face gradually faded. It seems that I was too naive. How could you possibly know? He did not expect that Fu Li did not seem to be stupid at this moment. He even understood what he was saying. With an anxious expression, he said, I'm serious. There's still a big fellow here. It's just asleep, but it's going to wake up soon. Fu Li's words were incoherent, and there was no beginning or end to them. Lin Bai frowned. He didn't know what he was talking about at all, and it wasn't good for him to continue pestering him. So he went along with Fu Li's words. All right. Then tell me how to completely wake it up. Fu Li frowned and thought hard. He became quiet again, as if this question of Lin Bai's had him stumped. Lin Bai had a moment of peace, and finally heaved a sigh of relief. He began to look around for a way out. He did not know that the Alchemist Association outside had nearly tumbed the sky upside down. The mountain closest to the forbidden area was the Alchemy Peak. The terrain here was extremely strange. If one stood at the highest point of the Alchemy Association, one would discover that this mountain peak was like a strangely shaped cauldron. The head and tail were connected, and the ears of the cauldron stood on both sides. There were many different opinions regarding the origin of this mountain peak. However, the most bizarre one was that it was rumored that this mountain peak was formed from a cauldron. It was very mysterious. Even the library had a few related records, but they were extremely vague. In addition to all the half-true and half-false rumors, everyone didn't appreciate it. They just thought that it was just a rumor. After all, this kind of statement didn't have any details. If it really was formed from a cauldron, then how huge would this cauldron be? However, from the expressions of the president of the Alchemist Association and the elders, it was obvious that they didn't take it seriously. However, this mountain peak was indeed a very good place. The spiritual chi here was more abundant than elsewhere, and there were many medicinal plants growing here. It was suitable for refining pills. Moreover, refining pills here would give twice the result with half the effort. With the nourishment of the spiritual GI, it wasn't easy for the furnace to explode. Moreover, it wasn't known whether this was a placebo effect, but the success rate of refining pills here was also higher. In the end, the quality of the pills produced was even better. The people only thought that it was because of the abundant spiritual energy. Therefore, many disciples would be here to pick herbs or refine pills, and today was no exception. However, the disciples on the mountain faintly felt the earth and mountains shake. They did not understand the situation and thought that it was because someone was practicing martial arts, or that the phenomenon was caused by pills, so they did not take it to heart. However, soon after, it seemed that even the surrounding temperature had increased. One of the disciples wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked up at the sky. It was a cloudy day today, so there was no sun. Occasionally, there would be a cool breeze blowing, which was considered dry and cool. However, they could not feel any wind at the moment. Even if there was, it was still a warm current. Do you guys feel that the temperature seems to have increased? When I went out, it was not this hot. It was actually quite cool. The companion beside him nodded. Now that you mention it, the temperature seems to have increased by quite a bit. It's really strange. It was quite comfortable just now, but in a short while, it became hot. The sky was still covered with dark clouds, and there wasn't a single bit of sunlight, so everyone didn't care. It's probably going to rain soon, so it suddenly became a little stuffy. Let's move quickly. We have to pick 10 stalks of skyheart grass today, or else we won't be able to report back when we go back later. As soon as they finished speaking, they quickened their movements, but the temperature in the air was getting higher and higher. It was obviously a cloudy day, and everyone was sweating profusely. Their faces were flushed red, as if they were cooked prawn in a pot. It was as if the entire mountain peak had become a blazing furnace, and the flames were burning brighter and brighter. It had reached an unbearable point. It's really strange today. It's obviously a cloudy day, but it's actually so hot. This won't do. I really can't stand the heat. If this continues, I'm afraid I'll melt. Everyone was sweating profusely, and they were forced to stop what they were doing. The leading senior brother's cultivation was a little higher than theirs, but even so, he could still feel the surging heat wave. Even the wind in the air was hot. He looked at the sky above him. It was gloomy, and there was not a single bit of sunlight. He sensed that there were no strange fluctuations in the surrounding spiritual energy. There should be no one refining pills here. If that was the case, why would the temperature here suddenly rise? He suppressed the doubts in his heart. He really could not bear to give up the mission in his hand. After all, this was an urgent order from his superior. Time was of the essence, and he could not afford to make any mistakes. Let's hold on a little longer. Only a few stalks, we will be able to complete the mission soon. Everyone was helpless. They could only circulate all their spiritual energy to resist the surrounding heat. Some even took out water or ice-type artifacts to the surroundings, which barely brought out a trace of coolness. However, these only did the job temporarily. They simply could not solve the problem at the root. As the temperature rose, even these magic treasures lost their use. There was no sun, but they felt as if 10 suns were roasting them in the sky. They were completely defenseless. Some of the people with lower spiritual power could not withstand the temperature, so their exposed skin became red and wrinkled. Then, small transparent bubbles appeared. The leader was shocked when he saw this. This is not a phenomenon caused by fire poison. It can only be done by high-level flames. How could it appear here? There was no fire around, but the ground under their feet was boiling hot. The strange feeling was more and more obvious. It was as if they were in a big cauldron, and there was a burning flame outside. He looked around but could not find the source of the change. There was no fire around them, but why was there a fire poison gas? All kinds of doubts emerged, making him puzzled. However, Before he could figure out the reason behind it, he heard a cry, "Look at the skyheart grass." It turned out that the skyheart grass could not withstand such high temperature. Its leaves, which were originally as green as jade, were now curled up in a charred and withered way. They were like frosted eggplants. They were extremely careful when they picked skyheart grass. They had used special methods to preserve it, making it look exactly like the ones they had just picked. Only in this way could they preserve the medicinal properties as much as possible. Now that they were like this, it also meant that more than half of the medicinal properties had been lost. The leader immediately ordered, "Retreat immediately." He secretly hated himself for not leaving earlier. The withering of the skyheart grass would make their losses even greater. Just as they hurriedly retreated, they didn't know if it was an illusion, but they felt that the temperature had suddenly dropped. It doesn't seem to be that hot anymore. A wind blew in the air, bringing a hint of coolness. The skyheart grass that was gradually withering became much better. What the hell is going on? What the hell? Could it be that someone did something? Everyone looked at each other. They didn't know what was going on. It was because of their hesitation that they missed the best opportunity to escape. Since the temperature had returned to normal and it was no longer hot, the leader did not plan to leave. After all, they still needed to pick a few more skyheart grasses to make up for the few that had withered. Everyone, continue to search for the skyheart grasses. I will report the abnormality to the elders later. Drip. The cold water fell on one of the people's face. He suddenly raised his head and muttered to himself, "Is it going to rain?" The sky was still gloomy. For some reason, everyone felt a little cold. It was as if there was a cold wind constantly blowing from the back of their necks. The piercing cold wind was everywhere, and it could even penetrate into their bones and blood. The companion beside him did not take it to heart. "Maybe. Let's finish it quickly so we can return quickly. This place is too strange. Who knows what will happen later?" His words became true. They didn't expect him to be right. At first, it was only a few drops of rain, so they didn't take it to heart. However, the next second, the rain poured down like a torrential downpour. It was as if a big hole had been opened in the sky, and water was continuously leaking down from there. Everyone was caught off guard. They were poured with water from head to toe. They seemed as if they had just fished it out of the water. Is there anything wrong with this damn weather? It's crazy today. Forget it. It's probably because we went out without looking at the almanac today. If it's not going to kill us, it's going to drown us. There were already people cursing nonstop. There were also people who hurriedly opened their spiritual energy shields or used waterproof magical artifacts to try to resist the rain. However, the rain actually ignored the spiritual energy shields or the protection of magical artifacts and went straight through. It was obvious that it was not ordinary rain. The leader's sharp eyes noticed that the rain did not seem to come from the sky. It seemed that the sky was just a temporary point of its descent. As for its true source, no one could figure it out. This rain is too sudden. Don't be like the bloody weather just now. It's coming aggressively. It won't really drown us, right? Although it was a joke, with the previous experience, it was better to leave as soon as possible. However, it was too late. If someone were to stand at the highest point of the Alchemist Association, they would discover that the sky above one of the peaks was covered with dark clouds, while the other peaks were clear and sunny. This was a stark contrast. Unfortunately, because of Lin Bai's matter, as well as the city lord, Manhwa, and the others, everyone had heavy tasks on their hands and could not spare time at all. Therefore, naturally, no one noticed that this group of disciples was in deep trouble. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, like a surging torrent. They couldn't even make out north, south, east, and west, let alone finding the direction to leave. It was already good enough that they could protect themselves from being washed away by the current. Everyone hurriedly climbed higher, and the ground under their feet was gradually submerged. They observed that the direction of the current was extremely unusual. If they were really washed down, they didn't know where they would go. Therefore, they used their spiritual power and grabbed onto something that could be attached to them. The skyheart grass has been washed down. Because of a moment of carelessness, a herb basket was accidentally washed away by the rapid current. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace, and there were several skyheart grass in it. A companion saw this and hurriedly reached out to grab it. He almost fell into the current. If it were not for the people around him who quickly pulled him out, he might have also disappeared. You don't want to live anymore. If the Skyheart grass is gone, we can still go pick it. If you are gone, where can we find you? That person was still fearful. Fortunately, there was a fellow disciple whose spiritual artifact was shaped like a boat and was usually used for traveling. He did not expect it to come in handy this time. The few of them sat inside reluctantly and looked at the rapid river. They originally wanted to take a boat to leave, but the current was too fast, and they could not circulate their spiritual power at all. In addition, there was an inexplicable energy fluctuation in it. Not to mention taking a boat, they would be affected easily even when flying on a sword. They fell into the flood. An absurd thought rose in everyone's hearts. It was clearly a mountain, but it was as if they were in an endless sea at this moment. The few of them sat on the boat and circulated their spirit energy one after another, supporting the boat so that it wouldn't be washed away by the water. It was extremely difficult to move forward, and they had tried it before. They almost capsized the boat, and some of them even fell into the water and choked on a few mouthfuls of water. However, it was fortunate that they were rescued. This path was not feasible at all, so the few of them could only give up. The originally beautiful mountain peak had become an isolated island that trapped them. What should we do now? We can't just sit here and wait for death, right? If this continues, the water will rise sooner or later and drown us. Seeing that the water level was rising bit by bit, it would not be long before these spiritual artifacts would not be able to support them. Everyone was worried. This shouldn't be. Logically speaking, why isn't there any reaction from the surrounding peaks when there's such a huge commotion? It's as if they didn't notice anything. Everyone also noticed this strange point. That's right. Someone should be coming to save us now. Why isn't there a single person? Quickly contact the elders. See if you can contact them. Everyone took out their voice transmission talismans and realized that the message couldn't be sent out at all. All the methods used to transmit the message had failed. Everyone's faces were ashen, and they revealed expressions of despair. If this is the case, won't we drown here without anyone knowing? Could it be that we've encountered a ghost formation? Why can't the message be sent out? Some people didn't believe in this. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't contact the people in the outside world. It was as if there was an unknown force that isolated them. This place had become a small dimension. The people in the outside world didn't know what was going on, and they couldn't bring the news out. Someone revealed a desperate smile and said dejectedly, "Looks like we can only wait for those senior brothers to come and help us collect our corpses." A deathly silence pervaded the crowd. Just as everyone had given up hope and were prepared to welcome death, someone noticed that the water level was slowly receding. Look, isn't the water receding a little? Everyone quickly stretched their necks and craned their necks to look. As expected, the water seems to have receded. Don't tell me we don't have to drown. The receding water was inexplicable, just like when it came. They did not know where it came from, nor did they see where it went. It was as if it had all been absorbed by the ground. When the receding water was almost gone, everyone was so happy that they wept and cheered. That's great. Heaven will never give us certain death. It seems that God can't bear for us to die here. They had walked through the gates of hell a few times and were almost invited by the king of hell to drink tea. They did not dare to stay too long and did not care about the Skyheart grass. Their priority now was to save their own lives. I don't dare to stay any longer in this damned place. Who knows what will happen next? Although the leader of the group was eager to complete the mission, his life was still the most important. He did not dare to say anything else, and everyone hurriedly left. At the same time, the temperature became even lower. White smoke came out of their mouths. The few of them gathered their clothes and immediately had a bad premonition. They hurriedly circulated their spiritual energy or used flying magic treasures. They scrambled to leave this place. They were afraid that if they were even half a step late, they would be left behind. No one turned their heads, so they did not notice that the faint blue crystal was rapidly spreading toward the mountain peak. It was as if there was a mysterious and powerful force that occupied this mountain peak. If they were even a step late, they would probably be covered by it. The leader immediately reported the abnormality in energy found in the mountain peak to the elder in charge. Elder Gu turned pale with fright when he heard that. What? There's actually such a thing. It's absolutely true. We definitely won't take this matter as a joke. He Qingyuan and a few respected elders were outside helping the city lord capture Lin Bai, while Yanhua and the others were seriously injured. It could be said that most of the elite forces in the Alchemist Association were not in the association. There were only a few elders who could take charge at the moment. They made a prompt decision and immediately mobilized people to check on the situation. In order to avoid harming the innocent, they immediately cleared up the disciples who were still lingering nearby. However, when they rushed over to take a look, everyone was stunned on the spot. They could even stuff an egg into their mouths. How could this be? Everyone could not believe what they were seeing. Many of them rubbed their eyes, thinking that they were hallucinating. They saw that the mountains in front of them were verdant. Whether it was the ground or the treetops, they were all covered in a layer of light blue ice crystals. The green tree branches were supposed to be like jade, but now they were covered in blue crystals. Even the water stains that had not dried up had condensed into a variety of strange ice pillars and other shapes. Even the ground was no exception. With a layer of thick ice, the entire mountain seemed to have suddenly become the cold extreme north. It did not fit in with the outside world. One had to know that when they came here, the entire journey was still filled with the chirping of birds and the fragrance of flowers. The trees were thriving, growing very luxuriously and full of vitality. However, this was a world that belonged to ice. Everything was frozen in it, as if they were lifelike ice sculptures. It could be said that they were the workmanship of nature. They were only a few steps away, but there was a world of difference between them and the outside world. They did not know where the cold wind came from. Everyone subconsciously shivered and finally came back to their senses from the shocking scene in front of them. The previous disciple also showed a confused expression. When we left, it wasn't like this. Towards the end, his voice suddenly became much softer. When they thought of the time when they left, the temperature had already shown signs of turning cold. It was only because they were in a hurry to leave this damn place, so they didn't appreciate it. If they had left a little slower at that time, would they have become one of the many ice sculptures? At the thought of this, everyone kept quiet out of fear. An unprecedented chill surged into their hearts, and cold sweat broke out on their backs. They felt as if they had walked back and forth from the gates of hell. Are you saying that you've already experienced fire roasting and water flooding before? If the elders had some doubts about what they had said before, but now that they saw the shocking scene in front of them, the doubts in their hearts had long been dispelled. The few people who led the way hurriedly nodded, feeling as if they had survived a calamity. Although the others had not seen the scene at that time, it was not difficult to imagine it based on what they had seen now. It was likely a scene that would cause others to be astonished. Elder Gu formed a seal with his hand. Spiritual light flashed from his fingertip and swiftly rubbed it on his eyes. Immediately, 2 rays of divine light appeared. Most importantly, there was a crack in the middle of his forehead. Similarly, a spiritual light appeared as if it was a third eye. His lightning-like gaze landed on the mountain. Any disguise would be unable to hide in front of him. However, Elder Gu's brows were knitted together. Everyone knew that this was Elder Gu's ultimate skill. However, at this moment, there was no relaxed expression on his face. There was only an incomparably grave expression on his face. For a moment, his heart was in his throat. Elder Gu, did you discover anything? Elder Gu shook his head. Even when I opened my heavenly eye, I did not find anything abnormal. Either it's hidden too well, or this force is too powerful. Compared to the first type, Elder Gu was more inclined to the second type. After all, when his heavenly eye swept over, he could feel a faint pressure coming from it. When he went to investigate further, that pressure disappeared without a trace. It was as if it was just an illusion. At this moment, the temperature in the surroundings became even lower. Even those who had not stepped inside could feel the bone-piercing coldness. They all circulated their spiritual power to resist it. The light blue ice crystals seemed to have been given life. They began to move and actually began to spread in their direction. Everyone, be careful. Just as Elder Gu was reminding everyone, the the ice crystals gradually receded, as if they were just playing around. Soon, they disappeared into the air, and even the crystals on the trees melted. Drip, drip, drip. Water kept flowing, so much so that it converged into a small stream on the ground. Elder Goose sensed a special fluctuation coming from the surroundings, so he hurriedly used his heavenly eye to look over. He could vaguely see a huge and pure energy flowing into the ground in an instant before finally entering the forbidden area. It actually has something to do with the forbidden area. Could it be that there's something new? Just as Elder Goo was about to use his heavenly eye to check, boom! A loud sound could be heard. The earth and mountains shook. Everyone could feel the earth beneath their feet shaking. Not too far away, what was even more shocking was that countless mountain rocks had collapsed and sunk into the ground. It was as if they had received some inexplicable power. Elder Goo hurriedly used his heavenly eye to look over. The huge black turtle covered most of the sky. He could only vaguely see such a shadow. Then, it flashed and disappeared. In an instant, it became incomparably dark. Sensing that danger was approaching, Elder Goo hurriedly wanted to withdraw his gaze, but it was still too late. Ah, my eyes! With a scream, Elder Goo covered his eyes and fainted on the ground from the pain. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. The rocks not far away continued to collapse, as if they had been stepped on by some huge creature. Even they found it difficult to keep their bodies steady. This place is dangerous. We shouldn't stay here for long. Let's retreat now. Now Elder Goo's condition is unknown. They had to leave first and then make plans. Now that such a major incident had occurred in the Alchemist Association and several elders were injured, the movements of the mountain peak were still ongoing. Everyone lacked a backbone, so they had no choice but to hurriedly send a message to He Ching Yuan to invite him back. At this moment, He Ching Yuan was working together with the city lord to track down Lin Bai's whereabouts. After receiving the message, he said somewhat apologetically, "City Lord, something has happened in the association, and I need to go back and deal with it." The city lord waved his hand. "Don't worry. With me here, the heavenly net will be wide open and flawless. I believe that sooner or later, we will be able to capture this devil and bring him to justice." "Oh, right. Is the matter at your side serious? Do you need me to send more people?" He Ching Yuan declined the city lord's good intentions. "Thank you for your concern, city lord. The most urgent matter now is to capture this devil, Lin Bai. The Alchemist Association doesn't need to waste resources. I can handle it myself." It was a pity that Elder Goo didn't make it clear in the message. Otherwise, He Ching Yuan wouldn't have said such a thing. After all, what happened in the Alchemist Association wasn't a small matter. When he rushed back, everyone looked as if they had seen their savior and quickly surrounded him. "President, you're finally here. What exactly happened?" Elder Goo spoke concisely and told him everything that had happened before. Just as they were leaving, he even sent disciples to continue to use magic tools to investigate the movements of the mountain. He Ching Yuan frowned and made a prompt decision. "Bring me there immediately to check out the situation. Report." At this moment, the disciples who were scouting came running back one by one. Their expressions was as if they had seen a ghost. "Yes, President. That mountain peak seems to be collapsing." Everyone immediately turned pale with fright. How could it collapse? He Ching Yuan seemed to have thought of something, and his expression was uncertain. He quickly walked over while the others followed closely behind. When everyone arrived in front of the mountain peak, they realized that what the disciple had said was true. Even from a distance, they could feel the tremors coming from the ground. Countless mountain rocks fell, and the ground collapsed in large areas. Amidst the flying dust, there were all kinds of medicinal plants that were wrapped within. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace as if they had been swallowed by the ground. The rumbling sound was incessant, and there were even huge pieces of rubble that were like meteors that fell from the sky. They were aimed at everyone, but with a wave of He Ching Yuan's hand, they instantly changed their direction and smashed into the mountain body that was about half the height of a person. Boom! The two collided like fireworks. Tiny rocks rolled on the ground, and the dust around everyone's feet hit their faces, causing many people to cough. They covered their faces with their sleeves and had no choice but to circulate their spiritual power to resist. What is going on? Could it be that the commotion just now has caused an earthquake? Even if it's an earthquake, it wouldn't only affect this area, right? I think it's just like the water and fire and the collapse just now. This earthquake also came out of nowhere. Everyone was discussing among themselves. This earthquake was really strange. It only affected this area, but the other places that were beyond the range of the mountain were very calm. He Qingyuan's head tightened. No one could understand the depth in his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a moment, he said, "Does anyone know when this mutation began?" "It was probably in the morning when we started picking herbs. At that time, we thought that it was caused by the hot weather, but later we realized that it wasn't." "President, from the looks of it, this change doesn't seem to have occurred naturally. It seems to be caused by man-made." No one knew who said this, but everyone felt that it wasn't right. It sounded like a fantasy. After all, who had the ability to cause such a huge change? When the people around him heard this, they immediately revealed a mocking smile. "I think you've become stupid from refining pills. It was man-made? Who did it? Let's not talk about whether there's anyone with such powerful strength. Even if there is, they wouldn't appear here." A figure appeared in He Qingyuan's mind. It was Lin Bai. He might really have such strength. After all, he had stirred up the city lord's estate like a pool of muddy water. This person was even more like a loach. He had actually escaped. However, thinking about it, he should be thinking of a way to escape the city lord's pursuit. It was impossible for him to do such a thing. It's not a solution to let it collapse like this. Will it harm the other peaks and the foundation of the Alchemist Association? He Qingyuan thought of the legend about this mountain peak, and his expression suddenly became unpredictable. He subconsciously looked up. That was once the highest point of the mountain peak, and also the place that looked like a cauldron lid. Now, it had disappeared without a trace. A huge amount of spiritual power burst out from it. He wanted to stabilize the mountain and stop it from collapsing. But how could he resist this destructive force? It was as if it was destined to be destroyed, and there was no way to reverse it. An endless amount of spiritual power was injected into it. He Qingyuan's expression was a little ugly, but it did not have any effect. Other than slowing down the speed of the mountain's collapse, there were still many broken stones falling down. The people around him also said, "President, let me give you a hand." Although they also did not understand why the president was so interested in this mountain, he had already done it. There was no need to ask so many questions. Even so, everyone's spirit energy added together could not stop the mountain's collapse. In the blink of an eye, it was only half its original height. "It's useless. President, let's stop. It's a waste of spiritual power if we continue like this." He Qingyuan gritted his teeth and his expression became darker and darker. At this moment, Lin Bai was still unaware of the disturbance outside, and that even He Qingyuan had returned to the Alchemist Association and felt the collapse of the formation. It was as if there was an invisible force that was driving the collapse of this place. The trembling ground and the falling rocks reminded him that the situation here was very unstable. "Looks like this isn't a place to stay for long." Lin Bai grabbed Fu Li's hand and was about to take him away. Fu Li was still a little reluctant to leave. He looked back from time to time, but he didn't know what he was looking at. Fortunately, he knew that there was danger here, so he couldn't stay any longer. Therefore, although he didn't want to leave, he still cooperated with Lin Bai and didn't cause any trouble along the way. However, halfway through, Lin Bai was a little confused. There was no other reason. The road here was full of twists and turns. Most importantly, even the environment around him was almost the same. It was always the same brown rock. It was like a huge maze, making people dizzy and disoriented. They didn't even have a sense of direction, let alone finding a way out. After walking a few rounds, he felt like he was walking in circles. Even when he turned his head around, it was still the same. It was as if he was lost in it. If this continued, Lin Bai suspected that he wouldn't be able to walk out even if he walked for his entire life. Fu Li's voice sounded from the side. "Why aren't you leaving?" Facing his muddled face, Lin Bai couldn't help but sigh. Sometimes being stupid wasn't a bad thing. For example, at this moment of life and death, he still couldn't feel any negative emotions. He was completely unaware that death had quietly arrived. Rumble. Accompanied by a loud sound, countless pieces of rubble fell. There were even boulders that were half the height of a person that fell down, landing right where they were standing. If it wasn't for Lin Bai's quick reaction and hurriedly pulling Fu Li to hide on the side, he would have been smashed into meat paste by the boulders. Looking at the deep crater, Lin Bai's heart was still filled with lingering fear. However, it was not good to summon Little Red and the others at this time. If Little Red and Little Green were here, they could help him find the way. However, the state of the space here was extremely unstable. It could even be said that it was fragile. Perhaps it was because all of the spiritual power had been sucked away by the small cauldron, or perhaps it was because of something else. In short, this place could not withstand any other power. If Little Green and Little Red suddenly appeared, the fluctuation of spiritual power, together with the power of the divine beast, would only exacerbate the collapse of this space. At that time, not to mention leaving alive, even standing here would be a problem. The slightest carelessness would cause them to be swept away by the spatial rift, and from then on, they would be lost in the magnetic field of the air. Their bodies would perish, and even their bones would not be found. Even pets with special powers like Little Treasure could not come out. It could be said that this